The world-famous Grand Canyon in northern Arizona is contained within not only national park land, but lots of tribal land as well. Native American inhabitants of the Grand Canyon dates roughly to 200 BC, and today, 3 tribes occupy the area. One of these is the Havasupai tribe, who as a means of survival have turned to tourism, attracting thousands of people annually to its gorgeous turquoise waterfalls. This practically unearthly landscape is on basically any outdoorsy person's bucket list, including mine for many years. I'd always seen pictures of these waterfalls at the bottom of the Grand Canyon and thought to myself, one day I'll have to experience this. And on our most recent road trip across Utah and Arizona, we were finally able to make it happen. Visiting the Havasupai Reservation is both costly and requires a lot of planning, plus the hiking you'll encounter is not for everyone. It is definitely one of the craziest, most remote travel experiences I've ever had, and in this video, I can't wait to share it all with you guys. I'll be going over not only our own itinerary, but tips and recommendations that could enhance a visit of your own. Now, our Southwest road trip contained our first thorough visit to the Grand Canyon as a whole, and if you missed the last video where we visited the national park, I'd highly recommend checking that out first. Tackling an inner canyon hike in both the national park and Havasupai tribal lands gave us a much better understanding of the canyon, and both are among my favorite hikes I've ever been on. The trail in Havasupai connects the Hualapai Hilltop Trailhead where you depart for your trip and extends all throughout the village of Supai, the campground, the 5 waterfalls that this area is known for, and actually continues into the national park itself to the confluence with the Colorado River. Try and keep up with me here, but there are actually 3 canyons within the greater Grand Canyon that you'll have the opportunity to hike through. The first of which includes 8 miles of the Havasupai Trail, which takes you down into the village of Supai. Then you connect with canyon number 2, which the incredible Havasu Creek runs through. This is of course where you have your 5 waterfalls and the campground, which begin just after the village. The campground itself is located 2 miles from Supai, and prepare to walk between them a number of times during your visit. Canyon number 3 begins right after you pass the 5th and final waterfall, and only some visitors to Havasupai see it. It sits entirely within the national park and is where you'll go if you want to continue hiking to the Colorado River confluence. I'm sure the experience is amazing, but since we hiked 15 miles to the river in the last video, we chose to pass it up during our visit. Our turnaround point would instead be at the Havasupai National Park border, which is 6 miles out and back from the campground and 10 miles out and back from the village of Supai. This allowed us to see all 5 waterfalls, which is exactly what I was hoping to do this visit to Havasupai. In total, we walked approximately 20 miles across 3 days spent here. 8 miles from the trailhead to the campground, 4 miles to the village and back for food, 6 miles to the national park border and back, and lastly 2 miles back to Supai where we flew out of the village on a helicopter. The amount of miles you hike is obviously going to fluctuate depending on what your priorities are, and you can end up hiking much longer than we did. We probably would have gone all out if, as I said, we hadn't hiked 15 miles in the national park. As for how our 3 days were divided, the first was dedicated to getting all the way down to the campground. Day 2 was our big hiking day, where we saw all the waterfalls. Then on day 3, we made our way back to Supai and waited around for hours trying to get a ride out of there. Of course, I'll dive more into the specific process of doing these things as we dive into our experience. Let me now talk about the elephant in the room, which is that the reason Havasupai is so hard to visit and requires so much additional planning is you need a permit. Each year these go live on February 1st and provides visitors with access to tribal land during tourism season, which spans February to November. I've never attempted to get a permit this way, but from what I understand, they're gone in seconds. The saving grace is that Havasupai has a cancellations page, where people put their permits up for grabs if something gets in the way of their visit. In 2023, there were more cancellations than ever because the only permits allowed for use were those issued in 2020 when everything shut down due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We didn't even know we'd be going to Havasupai until right before our 2-week road trip. But we got the exact dates we were hoping for right at the tail end of the trip before flying out of Las Vegas, Nevada. As of 2023, permits go for $395 a person, equating to $131 per night for 3 nights. This is the only number of nights you're allowed to book for every 1 visit to Havasupai. That said, it's up to you how many of the 3 nights you'll want to occupy during your visit. As long as you're out on the final day of your permit, you're good, so you can check in a day late and spend 2 nights if you want to. This is actually what we did since that was the perfect amount of time necessary to experience all the things on our itinerary. To check in, you'll head to Grand Canyon Caverns Inn, which is a small motel and tourist attraction that also resides in the Havasupai Reservation. There, you'll fill out a little bit of paperwork and they'll give you 4 things: your permit, a parking ticket that you put on your windshield, a tag you place on your tent, and a wristband which you have to wear at all times in Havasupai. A few miles before the trailhead, a few tribal members will ask to see your permit, not your wristband but the permit itself. Then you'll park at Hualapai Hilltop and begin your hike down into canyon number 1. And so it begins, 8 miles down to the village of Supai and then another 2 miles to the campground where we're going to call it a night. But we just got started and I'm really looking forward to it. This was a lot drier than the South Rim at the National Park and other canyons in Havasupai, but it still has that familiar Grand Canyon scenery that you know and love, and a surprising amount of color as well. The cliffs may have not had the height of later sections in the canyon, but it's still imposing for what it is and a solid introduction to Havasupai. The first 2 miles head downhill, but for the other 6, you're basically walking on flat ground through dried up washes. The scenery doesn't change much, and it's not the most beautiful overall. You can tell this trail's main purpose is to get you from point A to point B, from the trailhead to the village. Right before this, you do get your first glimpse at Havasu Creek, and I was shocked by how clear it was. It doesn't really get turquoise until after the village, but this was still very impressive in its own right. The reason for the purity of the water here are minerals such as calcium carbonate and magnesium, which occurred naturally in Havasu Creek. You'll see signs stating that pictures and videos are not allowed beyond this point, so I have almost nothing to share from inside the village. All I was able to get were a few shots of the grocery store to show you how tiny it was. There's also a small restaurant and a surprisingly modern school. Other than that, it's all dirt roads to get from place to place, and aside from a few carts and mules, people mainly walk as a means of transportation. When you're here, it really does feel as if you're in another country, so just as you would in that case, be sure to show respect to the tribal members and move out of the way if they're passing by on a cart or mule. Also, be sure to pack out your trash. I was surprised to see quite a bit of garbage out in the village, and I'm not going to point fingers, but do your part. Finally, I can show you footage again because we've officially cleared Supai. The village is very small and takes a matter of 5 to 10 minutes to walk through the whole thing. The first 2 of 5 waterfalls are coming up and are actually located far before you even get to the campground. The next morning when we had to come back anyway for food, we of course had to stop by and see them for the first time. These are easily the smallest 2 waterfalls, but are still very unique for different reasons. The first one you'll likely come across is Navajo Falls, which I think is the most underrated waterfall in all of Havasupai.
So we woke up today, November 18th. We're gonna check out all of the main waterfalls here at Havasupai, starting with Little Navajo Falls, right after the village of Supai. Absolutely beautiful.
It may not be as tall as the others, but it has a very impressive span and appearance. For starters, the water on the left tumbles over these steps that you actually see a lot of throughout Havasupai. Sections on the right are much more gentle and fall into an incredibly clear section of Havasu Creek. But above all, the thing that sticks out about Navajo Falls is the stunning vegetation which surrounds the waterfall. There's so much greenery that contrasts the orange cliffs of the canyon that peer above the waterfall. Seeing the distinction of colors at these falls were definitely one of the most impressive aspects. If you make your way behind Navajo Falls, you should come across a sign that points to waterfall number 2, 50-foot falls. There's a pretty crazy spur trail that heads inside the foliage and across some slippery obstacles. The tail end of these grants your only view of 50-foot falls from land, and when I say land, this is really all you're working with.
Here's waterfall number 2, or 1 if you're going in order, 50-foot falls. Only way to really get close to this one is if you want to get in the water. We're fine with this view over here on land, but I say on land with a grain of salt. We're still kind of in the water.
We chose not to go into the water, but from what we could see of 50-foot falls, it's an equally stunning waterfall with another very impressive width. The water of this one looks like it's flowing out of a wall, which was pretty trippy, and the foliage was just as pretty. After connecting back with the Havasupai Trail, you'll pass by a really beautiful section of the creek that steps down and creates a stunning foreground to the canyon in the back. There's a number of smaller cascades and waterfalls along this route that you should definitely keep your eyes peeled for. The campground is located directly in between waterfalls 3 and 4, meaning you do pass another one before getting there. However, it's easy to hide the view of the third one if you'd like to settle in and check it out the next day. It may come as a surprise to hear that this was our first time ever camping. We had no idea how to pitch a tent going in, but we eventually figured it out and now we know for next time. What's awesome about this campground is there's no assigned sites. You just set up camp wherever you want within the 1 mile long area. We were able to find a pretty spacious spot right along the creek with a bathroom right nearby. There's a few of these located throughout the campground, as well as a spring you can use to fill up water. This is the only place you can do this in all of Havasupai, so unless you bought some drinks at the grocery store, I'd highly recommend filling up here. It's also worth noting how stunningly beautiful the campground area is. Havasu Creek diverges and creates these little islands that you can only camp on if you make your way through some obstacles. For us, we had to walk along a log, but we saw some much crazier examples later on. The next day, it was time for our big hiking day, including waterfalls 3, 4, and 5. The most famous one in all of Havasupai is known as Havasu Falls, and you can definitely understand why it's so well known. It's the first of these falls that really display the turquoise color content that this area is known for. It's also quite tall with a height of 100 feet. My favorite view of Havasu Falls was from this side angle where you can get the waterfall and the canyon in one shot. You can also go down to the base and see it from there as well. Something no one seems to talk about are the peculiar formations in the rock beside the waterfall. It's really weird looking, but I think I like the falls all the more because of it. Believe it or not though, Havasu Falls isn't my favorite waterfall in Havasupai. That honor actually goes to Mooney Falls. This one features the same breathtaking color and is a whole lot taller at nearly 200 feet high. Not only is the waterfall itself absolutely incredible, but the portion of the Havasupai Trail which surrounds it is one of my favorite sections of any hike I've ever been on. It's also by far the most dangerous and puts Angel's Landing at Zion to shame in that regard. The trail combines so many unique elements like a tight cave passageway, steep rock scrambling, and tall ladders. But the thing that makes it so sketchy is it's all insanely slippery from the mist off of Mooney Falls. If this sounds like something you might not want to do, you can get a view of the falls before it all goes down. But I do think it's a shame when people can't pass this, because the rest of the hike from here on out is when the Havasupai Trail felt the most special to us. Right away at the bottom, there's your first of several creek crossings to access the base of the falls. The water maintains a relatively constant 70-degree Fahrenheit temperature throughout the year, and even in November, I didn't think it was that bad. For the remainder of the hike to waterfall number 5 and the national park border, you are walking right along Havasu Creek and get epic views of the water pretty much the entire time. At the next creek crossing was one of the biggest surprises from our hike and was a sighting of a couple bighorn sheep. I was already pretty stoked before they started crossing the water right beside us, and that right there was one of the coolest wildlife encounters I've ever had. The next few miles of the Havasupai Trail was in my opinion the most beautiful part, and that's saying a lot considering you don't see a waterfall for quite a while. There's still heavy emphasis on the creek, but also of the canyon as the cliffs get higher and higher. You'll notice this continue until reaching canyon number 3, where the sheer scale of it is equivalent to that of the national park. And that's no coincidence either, as it's where you leave Havasupai tribal lands. I mentioned that you can continue to get to the confluence of the Colorado River, but we only made it as far as Beaver Falls. This is waterfall number 5, and potentially the most unique of all of them. The number of large pools and steps making up this waterfall is absolutely stunning and easily compensates for its lack of height. I will say the hiking right before getting here is very intense, especially this bit with the ladder. I must once again reiterate that the Havasupai Trail is pretty challenging and not for everyone. To me, these obstacles make the hike all the more special, and it's a big part as to why I love it so much. Now, just like last video, I have a lot of footage from our time in Havasupai that I don't want to let go to waste, so for the next few minutes, enjoy a slow compilation of some of my favorite shots in the tribal lands. Before we wrap things up, I do want to go over the process of exiting Havasupai via helicopter. A chopper ride over a beautiful landscape has been at the top of my bucket list for a while, and when I found out you could do this in Havasupai for a minimal fee of $100 a person, and it drops you off back of the trailhead, I knew we couldn't pass it up. So, a little update on the helicopter situation. First, they only do this on select days. It's a Sunday. Sunday's usually pretty safe for the helicopters here. Second, it's on a first come, first serve basis. We decided to wake up at around 7 a.m., got to the village at around 8:15 a.m., and from there we had to wait in a line for about an hour and a half to even get our names on a list. But really, once you get your name on that list, you're guaranteed a ride out, so I don't really think we needed to get up that early at all. Whatever the case, it's to my understanding that they help the locals get out of town first, and then at 1 p.m., the tourists are allowed to leave as well. The main downside with taking the helicopter is you have to prepare to wait around for hours. When they do start calling tourists, you don't exactly know when you'll be called, so it can be a little risky going away and doing other things. When we got our names on the sign-in sheet, we did check to see how many other people were ahead of it, and since we were nowhere near the top, we felt comfortable heading back to some of the nearby waterfalls and eating at the restaurant. One of the things I wanted to try basically the entire trip was fry bread, and this was our first opportunity to do so. It's culturally unique to the tribes around here, so be sure to grab some if you're visiting. Altogether, it took about 4.5, maybe 5 hours for our names to be called, but when the time came, we were so excited to get on that helicopter. In conclusion, Havasupai was truly one of the most spectacular experiences of my life. If any of you have ever thought of visiting, I'd absolutely put in the effort to make it happen. I hope if you get the opportunity you enjoyed, and if you've been to Havasupai before, let me know what you thought of it in the comment section below. Also be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to Travel Dash if you enjoyed. Thank you all so much for watching, and thank you Utah and Arizona for an unforgettable road trip across the Southwest.